I've heard this story a few times of a writer who submits to an editor and is rejected, and then through some course of events submits the same manuscript again to the same editor, and this time is accepted. Can be a little frustrating. The rejection comes in, and there's such certainty in it, and then suddenly, no, it's a great story. What wasn't great suddenly is. Again, it can get frustrating. And we can start feeling like the publishing world is a little random and unkind. But I also reminded me of the author Jerry Stahl, who I interviewed, oh boy, it's about 10 years ago now. And Jerry Stahl had quite a career uh, to start with. I think he was writing for Esquire and he had done some sitcom writing. And then he got hooked on heroin and everything fell apart for him, as it often does. He ended up working at McDonald's, really hit kind of bottom for him. But then he wrote a memoir called Permanent Midnight. Ben Affleck took interest in it, and he went from McDonald's to flying around with Ben Affleck. And I talked to him about that, and I said, "What, compelled you to try the heroin in the first place?" And he said, "It was really weird, but it was like I thought if I really hit bottom, Keith Richards would just come and pick me up." He said, "I know it's crazy, but that's what I thought." And I, as a young man, did some drugs, not a lot, but I did some. But I never did heroin. When somebody once mentioned, like, "Hey, I think I can get some of this heroin stuff," I thought, "Are you crazy? What? Why would you do that? That stuff's like death." But I did some other stuff that maybe wasn't so smart. And when I met my wife, she never did any of that stuff. She went to a college where a lot of people in the 80s were playing around, and she looked around at people smoking pot and snorting cocaine and all this stuff. And she's like, "Nope, not for me, not interested, don't want to do hallucinogens, don't," and none of that stuff. And thinking about Jerry and thinking about myself and thinking about my wife and thinking about that editor reminded me that everybody in the world has to do something in order to learn not to do it. And the thing that I have to learn, or that I have to do to learn I shouldn't do it, may be different than you. I didn't need to take heroin to know not to take heroin. And I don't have to be, I would never have to cheat on my wife, say, to learn that cheating isn't a good idea. But some people have to do that. For whatever reason, each of us, everyone has to do something to learn not to do it. And there's always going to be someone who would never have to do that thing to learn not to do it. And as writers, to some degree, we go through this all the time. Sometimes we have to write a sentence, actually see it on the page to learn we don't want to write that sentence. That sentence doesn't belong in our story. Or we have to write a story, a whole story, to learn that we shouldn't write that story. Or if you're like me, if you listen to my earlier podcast, Writing What Comes Easy, you have to pursue a whole career, in my case, novel writing, to learn I'm not a novelist. Yeah, it's true. We all have to do it, which is why it's so important, if you're a creative person, just a person, but a creative person for sure, to learn to forgive. You got to forgive those editors who think your story's no good the first time they read it and then love it the second time. You got to forgive the readers who don't like your stories. You got to forgive the people writing books that you don't want to read. And you got to forgive yourself. You got to forgive yourself for all the mistakes you're going to make, for all the sentences that you put into a story and left there, and then realized years later, no, that shouldn't have been there. All the mistakes you're going to make. You have to forgive, because everybody has to learn from experience. Yes, some of us can learn through experimentation, but even that's experience. Experience is the teacher. I'm a teacher, and my words are useful in certain ways, but ultimately they don't really teach. They just at best point you in a direction. It's your experience that teaches you. You can't learn how to write a novel just by listening to podcasts about writing novel or reading books about writing novels. You got to write one at some point. That's how you actually learn. And if you want to learn from experience, you have to forgive. You have to allow that people have to do things they shouldn't do in order to learn not to do them. And if you can forgive others for their mistakes, You maybe can start forgiving yourself for all the ones you're going to make. And so you stop being afraid of being perfect. You let yourself experiment. You let yourself put in sentences that don't belong and then remove them. Put down stories that you didn't want to write and then stop writing them. Forgive yourself, and creativity becomes not a test to see if you can get it right, but a evolving expression of what you find most interesting in life. Yeah, yeah, it's true. Hey, thanks for tuning in. If you don't want to miss any of these, hit subscribe. And, if you like it, say so. I love hearing from you. I love hearing from you. What comes easily to you? What comes hard? It's kind of interesting to me. What comes easily? What comes hard? I'd be happy to hear that. Yeah. So until next week, this is Bill Kenower. Stay fearless.